quickly going to do the final test on Betáflight. All right, today we are going to set up Betáflight. We're going to be plugging in our Joshua Bardwell F7 and setting up all the components, our crossfire, our LED and buzzer, our GPS, our ports for our DJI camera, and our ESC setup. So first thing you're going to do is plug in your flight controller. First time you plug it in, it may be a little bit tough going in. There we go, booting out. And this may power some components off the USB. It may not power any. It doesn't look like it's powering anything for me. So if I wanted to have all my components turned on, I'm going to have to plug in to my XT60. So you're going to power everything on. All right, so we are connected. I always have expert mode enabled. First thing you want to do is just calibrate the accelerometer. You don't have to necessarily have the board completely level yet. You're going to come back and do this later after the build is complete. You're going to go into the ports tab. So you're at 1. First thing we're going to do is disconnect and update the firmware. We will see if there's a release for the Josh Bardwell board. There is. I've already done this on another board. So they've got a Betáflight 4.2.2 out for the DJI version of the Joshua Bardwell F7. We're going to load firmware online and then flash firmware to the board. This may take a few minutes depending on your internet speed and your computer speed. Alright, so the programming was successful. You can go back over here, click the button for update firmware to bring it back to the main screen, and then click connect. Sometimes you have to unplug it and plug the flight controller back in for it to be recognized after a flash. Powering down completely. Let's see if this works. Fresh plug-in. There we go. So now we're adding power back to have all our components on. We're going to connect. Always apply custom defaults unless you're doing something out of the ordinary. The flight controller is rebooting. There's no motor output. These are all just warnings basically telling you that you haven't finished the setup for the board yet, so you can't arm your craft properly. So we're going to come back to setup. Always do the calibrate accelerometer first. It doesn't have to be perfect on your initial setup. Then we're going to come over to ports. they have already gotten something set up for us. The ESC is already selected. UART1 is already selected as your serial RX, which I don't believe that is correct on our board. We're using R3 and R5 for R2 connections. Now our R3 is going to be our serial connection, so we're going to change that to serial. And our R5 is going to be another MSP protocol set at 57600 baud width. That's going to allow our pass-through communication so that we can use Bluetooth to use the Betáflight app through our cell phones. So then we have, you don't have to set anything up for your LED and buzzer, but then we also have our GPS, which is running on R1 and T1. So we're going to change this to GPS and leave the baud rate at auto. So this should be UART2 is set up as our MSP protocol for our DJI. So that is all correct. UART4 ESC sensor. We're going to save and reboot. Flight controller is going to reboot. Then you can connect again. There's still no motor output. Now see the list of things wrong is getting shorter. So now we're going to go to configuration. I always run my motor directions reversed. And here's where you're going to enable the motor protocol. I'm going to run D-Shot 600 and enable bidirectional D-Shot for RPM filtering. Now I already know that my motors have 14 poles and I want my idle value at 5.5. Those are pretty standard. If you're using abnormal motors, you may want to count your poles and make sure that these numbers are correct for your setup. So I'm running 8K. I'm using an F7 flight controller, should be able to support that. I do not need the magnetometer or the barometer, so I'm going to turn them off, leave the accelerometer on, just in case I want to use a leveling mode. That's the only reason that would be left on. The angle that you can arm the quad, I want to be able to arm it upside down or at any angle in between, so I set that to 180. The receiver is set to serial based, which is correct, but I'm going to be using crossfire, so I need to change that. And then down here, I'm going to be turning on GPS, which is a U-Blocks GPS, and I'm going to leave it on auto config. All these I leave alone. I'm going to be turning on the LED strip because I'm going to be using one of those. Other than that, I like to turn everything else off except for the RX lost. I don't use anything else on these tabs as far as beeps go. The only time I want my quadcopter to beep at me is when I'm plugging it in and when I lose it and I can't find it and I'm looking for it. So I turn all of them off except for RX lost. This means that when my receiver loses connection with my transmitter, my quadcopter will automatically start beeping a tone, and you can select different tones. I just like it to beep the standard tone. So then you click save, your flight controller will reboot. You can click connect again once you see the ports COM3 pop up. Your Betáflight back here will most likely say a different COM. That's just the amount of flight controllers that I have set up on this computer so far. So this is all correct. We're going to bypass this. We don't need to do anything on this. If you're noticing that your battery voltage is reading a little bit off, you may want to come in here and change the scale. You can use a voltmeter and get the exact voltage for your battery and then come in and scale it up or down if Betáflight is not reading that voltage correctly. And failsafe, I am going to be using GPS, so I'm going to set this at GPS rescue. The initial altitude is 50 meters, descent distance I changed to 30. Minimum satellites I set to 5. And I allow arming without the GPS fix. Altitude mode, I always want it to go to the highest altitude. In case I'm flying around trees, it will go to the highest altitude during that flight and hopefully fly back over the trees. All right, all this is correct. We're going to save and reboot. Once that comm pops back up, you can click connect. So in the PID tuning, this is where you're going to be spending most of your time on Betáflight. First things first, I turn off demin. I then go up and click save. I then go to my rate profile settings. I am going to leave all of this stock for right now. I will be coming in and changing things a little bit later as far as that tuning goes, but I'm just going to see how stock Betáflight 4.2.2 flies on the Joshua Bardwell board. I usually fly my rates around 1.2, 1.2, 1.0, and then 7.2, 7.2, 7.0, and with an expo of 0.2 and 0.2 on my roll and pitch. So I'm just going to leave that alone for right now. As far as my filter settings go, if you're flying a 5-inch quadcopter, you're going to want to change the dynamic notch filter, 350. Now that's going to be a better range that this filter is going to be looking for noise in, and we're going to also come up here and slam the sliders all the way to the right and click save. Alright, so that's everything here. Now we're going to go into receiver. You have to make sure that if your receiver is not powered by the USB, that it's powered by your XT60. So then when we power on our radio, you should see the light go green on your receiver. You should see that things are reading here, and then we also should see, hey, all of our stick movements and switches working properly on Betáflight. I use Spectrum as far as my inputs go. This is just going to give you a preview of what your quadcopter is doing in the air if you want to see a general rendition of that. Click save. And we're going to come down to modes. This is where you're actually going to set up what your transmitter does when talking to the flight controller. So to arm my quad, I want to use this switch. When you move that switch, it automatically picks it up. Move that like that. Now angle mode, I don't use often, but I'm going to add it here. I'm going to be using this switch. Flip that back. So now when I arm, it should go there. And when I flip the switch, it goes into angle mode. So I normally fly in acro mode, so unless I flip that switch, it will be flying in acro mode. Then my GPS rescue, I use on this switch up here. So I'm going to move the slider over, flip it back, and then the only thing else I really use, I'm going to be using LED low, so we're going to add a range for that, and that can be auxiliary 4 right in the middle. And then I'm going to use flip over after crash on the same one, but I'm going to move the slider all the way this way. So auxiliary 4 is now my LED light and my flip over after crash. And I don't really need to use any of these other functions. There's a lot of other abilities that you can set up in here. I'm just setting this up simply so I can get this quadcopter in the air as fast as possible. Okay, so now it says EEPROM saved, so that means your settings are saved. And when you go to the arm, you should see that it actually would arm the quad. When you are plugged into Betáflight, it will disable the arming functionality when it sees the MSP protocol over the USB. So now I can come down here to adjustments. I'm not going to do anything here or with servos. My GPS, I'm not going to let you see where I am at the moment. But this will pop up with satellites, your latitude, longitude, your altitude, and it will give you a 3D fix on a map if you have internet connection. It will also give you the amount of satellites, their satellite ID number, and the quality of the signal strengths. I'm not going to do anything in this tab at the moment, and we're just going to go over here to the motors tab. So down here you can see that my error rate is at 100%. I don't have any motors hooked up to my ESC yet. We're going to be doing that later in the build. As far as my OSD goes, I definitely turn off a lot of their functions. I like to leave battery average cell voltage. Just move it over here. Current draw I don't need. MAH draw I don't need. I also do altitude. That'll be up here in my top right corner. I definitely do not use my craft name. I don't use disarmed. I don't use my flight mode. And I can't get warnings because I'm using DJI. So I can turn all of that off. I do like to have a timer. I do like to have my RSSI value. And then I also do my link quality right next to that. My home distance, my home direction. Right here in the center up front. I like my GPS speed, along with how many satellites I have. And then I also record my latitude and longitude right in the goggles, so that if I do happen to go down, I have my latitude and longitude of my craft right there. I don't really use too many of the other functions. I like to keep everything in the top of my screen for the most part. And click save. I'm not doing anything with the video transmitter tab because with DJI you don't have to set up anything there. My LED strip, I am going to be linking my LED strip setup in the description. I'm going to basically just be doing that on the CLI. Alright, so now I'm on the CLI. I have this LED dump that I'm going to just paste in here and hit enter. And you can already see my LEDs have lit up blue. So we are going to go and type save and enter. That's going to save those settings. And I will bring you back into the LEDs strip so you can see what's going on here. So that code that I just gave you to type into the CLI tab, you can see that the colors here represent the color of the LEDs, and then the actual locations represent the locations of the 4 LEDs. So you could come in and change the color from blue to yellow. I'm not going to save any of this stuff, but yeah, you can go yellow, and then this way when you, I'll let you just see, when you go to the proper functionality on your switch, you can turn that on and off. And if I were to click save, you can see 2 of the LEDs turn yellow. So we're going to go back into the CLI, paste, hit enter. Now they all turn blue again because I'm going back to my original settings. And then I'm going to click save, or type save, hit enter. Now those settings are saved for the LED strip. Oh, and I want to also set up a buzzer because I do have the buzzer functionality on this. So let's go here. We're going to set this up in the modes tab. So beeper, I'm going to add a range and use auxiliary 2 for that. So now if I go up here, you can see auxiliary 2 is now angle mode and also my beeper. Alright, for this part of the setup, I'm just going to come over to Betáflight Suite 32 and flash everything up to 32.7. For whatever reason, with this ESC in particular, it doesn't seem to read all of the ESCs until you flash and start flashing them all. So I am going to flash and bring everything up to 32.7. See if this works. As you can see down here, not all of the ESCs are being read by the Betáflight suite. You know, the Hobbywing X-Rotor 40 amp 4-in-1 ESC seems to have this problem. I've had multiple units do this where it's only reading 1 or 2 of the ESCs until you start flashing things. And now see, there's 4 ESCs showing up. For whatever reason, I'm just gonna flash again. Just do all 4 all over again. The first two should have been done already, but I just feel like doing it over. And now this is ESC number 2. Now ESC number 3. As you can see, these are still on 32.6. Not sure why these Hobbywing ESCs do this, but as long as it all works out in the end. Alright, that should be all ESCs on 32.7, all with the same bootloader. Now I'm going to bring my ramp up power down to 25%, bring my temperature protection up to 150 C. I'm going to come back in and change my motor direction if I have to, changing my demag compensation to high. Moving my motor timing to 23. Startup beep I'm putting down to 2, so it's very quiet when I start it up. The beacon volume I put to 110. The beacon delay put down to 420. So if I lose the quadcopter, lose signal for whatever reason, it doesn't start beeping in another way, it will start beeping after 4 minutes and 20 seconds. Then I can say right setup. Alright, so we're back over to BL Heli Configurator. I'm going to show you how to change the motors so that they are in different locations. It's called motor resource remapping. So we're going to come down to the CLI, type resource. There we go. All right, so now you see all the resources. These are all the resources that your actual processor is using. So these are the actual outputs of the chip. So you can see that there's 8 motor outputs. We're only going to be changing the first 4. So motor 1 was spinning for 4, so we want to change 1 for 4 and 2 for 3 and vice versa. So we're just going to copy paste, and then say none for motor 1. Enter, press the up arrow, go back to 2. So now we have resource motor 2, none, and just do that for all 4 motors. Do that for all 4 motors if you want to do it correctly. So now it says all these resources are freed. So we're gonna go to back up to motor 1 and say resource motor 1. And then we're going to come back up here, and motor 4 was spinning for number 1, so we're going to come back and go CO7, enter. And that's going to change that motor resource to the pin CO7. Now we need to just do that for the other motors. So motor 2 was number 3, so we want to do CO9. Motor 3 was 2, so we want to make CO6 for number 3, and then motor 4 was number 1, so we want to make that CO8. And click save, or type save, and hit enter. It should receive your resources. Now your motor should be mapped properly. You'll hear your ESC reboot. All right, we are back over to BL Heli Suite. Just need to check the motor direction and the motor location. So we're just gonna read the setup just to see that everything is reading properly still, 0 bad frames. Then we're gonna come over to the motors tab. Once again, you wanna have your props off, especially if you're a beginner. Click the I understand propellers are removed tab, and now motors 1. I'm going to tilt this down a little bit. Motor 1 should spin properly for the motor 1 location, as it does. But we've got the motor direction spinning the wrong way. So motor 1 needs to go reversed. Motor 2 needs to go reversed. Number 3 needs to be reversed. And number 4 is the only one spinning the right direction. So 1, 2, and 3 need to be changed. So we're going to come back to the ESC setup. I'm going to say read setup. And motor, you right click on the ESC to choose a single ESC and say reversed for motor direction. Right setup. Okay. Then go to number 2, right click, motor direction reversed. Right setup. Okay. ESC number 3, right click, reversed, right setup, and click OK. Now we come back over to the motors tab. Your ESC and flight controller will reboot. Click the I understand. And now all the motor directions should be correct. So motor 1. Is correct. Number 2 is correct. Number 3 is correct. And number 4 is correct. So now you can turn this off, and we are ready for a test flight at this point. I just have to put the top plate on. 4 screws here to mount the top plate. And then 4 screws here to mount the GoPro mount. All right, the final steps, the things we have to do. this through. There's always a good time. Like this. That one's through. Just do the same thing here. And these are two RDQ straps. This is the free one that comes with your orders. And this is the heavy duty Kevlar rubberized one. That's about, I think, $5.99 on RDQ. But man, are they good straps. They do not break. They hold up to a lot of abuse. And I just put this in backwards. Of course. Luckily, it's the easy one. Gotta do it at least once on every quadcopter build. Make a mistake. Then I also messed up because I want to feed this guy through. I have this mounted on the side. So we're going to feed that through first as well, so we have the XT60 mounting on the side and out of the way of the props. So this is going to be like this. Sometimes if you fold it in half, it works better. This will be over here on the side. As long as I didn't do this upside down again, which I did. It can be fixed like this. Now that battery strap is on correctly for once. Alright, so now we're just going to use 4 screws here. And this is the only place on my quadcopter that I use a different size screw, and that is solely because if I use a taller cap head screw instead of a button head screw, I tend to damage my batteries if I take an impact on my battery, because the screw will go right into the battery and cause damage. And I don't want that. trick is using a screw that's shorter than your battery pad so that your battery doesn't take the hit of the screw. Just tighten these guys up back here. And now we just need the camera mount. This is always a fun part. Trying to get the last of your screws in. And I start out with loose. The first couple screws loose. And the last thing is going to be throwing some props. And the props out for me, so my props are going to be spinning this way. And this is where we use our 8mm ratchet set up. Alright, last thing to do is throw a pack on it. I use these Pulse Racing 1250 MAH. They're 120C, 240C burst, and they're very light. So next thing we need to do is go for test flight.